July 7th had arrived. It was hard to imagine. I was going to Vietnam with the teacher who inspired me. I met Dennis and the rest of our group at LAX. Bob Arata, Paul Knight, and Glenn Prentice. All three men served with Dennis at KHE SANH. However, this was Glenn's fourth trip back to Vietnam since 1993. He knew the country well and would act as our guide. Paul's son, Jeff, would be traveling with us as well. Donna Elliott, who had flown in from Arkansas the night before, was making her second trip in over a year. Her brother Jerry is still listed as missing in action at KHE SANH after his chopper was shot down near Long Bay. Reports indicate that Jerry had survived the crash and was last seen being led away by North Vietnamese soldiers. He hasn't been seen since. Donna is making this trip in hopes of meeting with Vietnamese officials in Hanoi to discuss Jerry's case. Dennis and the others have been waiting for this day for nearly 32 years. In less than 24 hours, Vietnam and everything it breathed would be inside of us. And it would stay with us long after we were gone. "15 hours later, and we were half a world away. Incheon, South Korea was our stop-off point before heading on to Saigon. As we prepared to step onto the plane and into another world, I couldn't help but wonder if all those years of yearning had prepared Dennis for what would lie ahead. Undoubtedly, the things he remembered would surely be different, much like an adult who visits his childhood home, only to realize it's much smaller than he had remembered. KHE SANH was no small thing. It was larger than life, something incomprehensible to anyone who did not fight there. Someone such as myself. I knew the history, the dates, the numbers, and the names. Names like Gunny Rimmel, but I didn't know about death, destruction, or the aftermath of war. When this trip was through, I would look at these men and anyone who fought in Vietnam with a newfound respect and understanding. What war is, and what it does to the soul of a 19-year-old kid. Ho Chi Minh City, still Saigon to those who live here, and to those who've returned. Saigon was South Vietnam's final stronghold before eventually falling to the communists in 1975. Everything America had fought for died here, and with it went a generation of young men. Today, Vietnam is very different. It's a communist country, but on the inside, in Saigon, it felt like freedom. It's a place of intrigue. And it's true what they say about the heat. It saturates you the moment you arrive. It gets deep inside you. The people are what stand out the most. This was my first trip to Vietnam, and being an American, I was concerned about their distrust or their disgust. But that was something far removed from the truth. The children were the most curious of all, greeting us in English wherever we went.
Hello!
Hello!
Hello! Hello!
And I heard that familiar phrase you always hear in the movies, America #1. It was sad in a way. because I knew the history. America had let these people down, but that didn't seem to matter. What mattered was we were returning, and for Vietnam, that was good. As we toured the War Museum, moving from room to room, I could sense their uneasiness as they stood and stared at what was their past, and remembering. Dennis had never been to Saigon, but just being back in Vietnam again for the first time in 32 years was beginning to take hold. This was just his first step of many to come. Tomorrow we leave for Hue City. We arrived in the ancient city of Hue, a city that was nearly destroyed during the Tet Offensive. But the streets, the citadel, it was all still the same. Hue is one of those places that feels nostalgic. French architecture set against a vast mountain range to the west. The Vietnamese people, being somewhat superstitious, say there are ghosts in those mountains. Hue City was familiar territory. Dennis had spent some time here before and after the siege, but Hue was an afterthought for him. His mind was out in those mountains to the west. I can see it in his eyes. It's almost like he's 19 again, setting out like he did so many years before.
Sit down.
By chance, we met a former North Vietnamese soldier, a soldier who had fought against the Americans at KHE SANH.
This is KHE SANH. These hills here, that's Laos. Laos, Korat, Ho Chi Minh Trail. You must have walked right down through there. Marines, looking for you. You looking for me.
This man showed no anger or disgust. He looked happy in a way, like he was with friends, people who understood. And they did understand.
Friends of yours were out there. Your friends were tough guys. Yeah, hi Mom. Your friends were tough guys.
Now it's me and you is the friend.
Friends. Before that.
Before? I don't know.
Oh, absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers. Saigon.
Cheers.
I am Mr. Lucky because I not died.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Me lucky too, not that. Me lucky too.
As I sat and watched these men talk about the past and what they endured, I realized that this man had suffered the same tragedies as the Americans had suffered. The rage of war and the loss of friends.
Remember. Run. It's two people. Run. No problem.
It made me realize that there are two sides to war, and that both sides have casualties. It was two different cultures and yet one understanding. The tragedies of war and the time it's taken to heal the past.
Bye-bye.
Good luck. Good luck. Good luck. Good luck.
Is that a load off?
amazing to be here. You're amazing to be here.